Hello, I'm Lorna and welcome to my channel Thread and Yarn. It's a place where I talk about my me-made wardrobe, the things I've sewn, the things I've knitted, the things I've naturally dyed, and a little bit about gardening and natural dye plant growing as well. But this is a slightly different episode. In this one, I'm going to be doing a tutorial about how to make a really simple home sewn skirt. It's got a number of different options, but it should fit anybody of any size. It's really adaptable and I think it's a great everyday pattern. I think it changes a lot based on the fabric and the little things you can do to make it yours. So I think it's a really good, basic sewing skirt pattern really. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to walk you through how to make one of your own based on your own measurements. So I've designed a sewing pattern in the past, the Bilbo vest, that's on my website, but this one is just completely free tutorial. I wanted to share it with you, so it's totally free and it's just me sort of sharing my experiences of making skirts like this for quite a long time and giving you some tips on how to make it yours. I want sewing your own clothes to be accessible for people. I think a lot of people like making their own clothes to regain some control back in their wardrobe, or to stop spending money with fast fashion, or just to make something unique or be creative. There's so many different reasons and great reasons for making your own clothes, and I want to help people with that. So yeah, it's a totally free video. So you don't need a physical pattern for this tutorial. I'm going to walk you through how to create the shapes of the skirt based on your measurements. There is something on my website which I put a link to below as well, which has a PDF of a inseam pocket piece that I've designed, and you can download that on my website and print it out, and it's also got the written instructions for the skirt there as well. That's for free on my website, or you have the option to leave a little bit of support or donation for me, which I'd really appreciate. No pressure. It's very hard to make a living in the arts, and I want it to be accessible, but I also need to live. So yeah, if you feel able to, and if that's if you have those kind of resources, even a tiny donation would be much appreciated by me. But if not, if you just want to use this free skirt pattern and build your knowledge, or you're not in a position or don't want to, that's totally fine as well. But I thought I'd mention it because every little helps. Anyway, that's all of that stuff out the way. So I've already made this skirt here. I'll talk you through it a little bit, just quickly before we get on to the making. So it's a gathered waist skirt, it's got an elasticated waistband for ultimate comfort, and it's got two different tiers, so the tiers are different widths. It's got inseam pockets, and it's a really good sort of comfy everyday skirt. I've made this one in an Irish linen from Simply Fabrics Brixton. It's gorgeous. I paid for this linen because I loved it. I paid for this linen. The only reason I say that is because the next fabric I'll show you, I've been given it, which is lovely. But yeah, this is the first one. And then the one I'm going to make with you today to show you how it's done is using this beautiful warm brown linen from Ray Stitch. It's gorgeous. They gifted this to me so that I could use it for the tutorial, which is very kind of them. I love Ray Stitch. They've got a wonderful selection of cottons and linens. You can find them in Islington in London or online. I've always found them lovely in there, and the linen is really lovely quality. I've used it to make lots of clothes, so I'm very familiar with this linen, so I can thoroughly recommend it. So I'm going to make something very similar today to show you how I made this one. I'm just going to make a couple of different tweaks, and there's going to be something extra as well because this fabric's plain, and I wanted to just show off a little bit of something if you wanted to add it on at the end. So this skirt, as I said, it's got two tiers. It's got the elasticated waistband, it's got the inseam pockets. This skirt is going to have exactly the same. I'm going to make this first tier slightly higher or slightly shorter so that the bottom skirt is bigger and comes up to about here. That's change number one. Change number two is that I'm going to add some pin tucks at the bottom. And I think pin tucks are a really cute little detail. And I think because this skirt is a bit plainer, I think it will just, yeah, I love block colour linen, but I think it would just be a nice little detail, and it means I can show you an extra little skill to add on if you feel like it, or if you don't and you feel like making that skirt's enough and you don't want something else, you want it to have quite a clean look, then skip the pin tucks. But I'll pop it in at the end just for fun. So let's get started. So this is quite an in-depth video. It's quite a basic skirt pattern, but I really want to help you build confidence with dressmaking and have fun and not get stuck. So I do spend a lot of time talking through it. There are chapters throughout, so you can skip ahead to things or go back to things if you want to find them. But what I would say is take a break, make yourself a cup of tea or whatever, and come back to it. Don't try to bash it all at one go. It might feel like a lot to take in. If it also feels like that, then have a look at the written instructions that are on my website. You can, I'll put the link to them below, and then that will hopefully help that feeling. You can also save this video for later and come back to it whenever you like. So to make the pattern, you'll need some fabric. I recommend woven fabric like linen or cotton. You could experiment, but that's what I would recommend. Something medium to lightweight, and you need some elastic for your waist based off your waist measurement. It's up to you on the thickness. I've used anything between 2.5 centimetres and 5 centimetres wide elastic. And then to work out how much fabric you'll need, you will need to use your measurements and then follow the instructions that I'm going to explain in the video, and create yourself a template so you know how many metres of fabric to buy. So the skirt is made up of rectangles. So it's really easy for cutting out. You don't need a pattern piece to draw around apart from the pocket. You just need to figure out the proportions of those rectangles based off your measurements. Now, if you see me looking over here, it's because my laptop's over here and it's got all the details on, all the numbers that I'm going to talk you through. There aren't loads of numbers, and there's not tons of maths to do. If you've, find that sort of thing a bit confusing, or if you've got any questions afterwards, pop me a comment on here or send me a message from my website and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. It might not be that day, I'm only one person, but I'll do my best to help you. So I want you all to have fun and enjoy your clothes. So, rectangles, as I said. So for this skirt and for both of them, you just need 3 rectangles. Now those rectangular shapes are the top tier, the bottom tier, and the waistband, and the pockets, but in terms of the rectangles. And for each of those pieces, you will need 2 lots of them. So you'll need a front and back waistband, a front and back top tier skirt, and a front and back bottom tier skirt. Now those proportions you can decide based on your own preferences and your own measurements. What we're going to do first is take our measurements. Now I think this is something that we don't always do that well. I think I'm going to get my tape measure and I'm going to show you. I think sometimes we're a little bit unsure about where our hips are and where our waist is. And I think sometimes we're not sure how tight to pull the tape measure, or we're unsure because we're sometimes in between sizes and things. But this is not based on any sort of dress size. This is based on your measurements. The only good thing, the other good thing as well, is that because it's elasticated and because there's a lot of ease, that if you find your body sort of changes throughout the month or the season, whatever, that it's still quite comfortable. So yeah, I'm quite a big fan of elasticated waist things. You can also get organic rubber elastic now if you want to avoid the nylon and things like that, so that's cool. But I'll just show you how I take my measurements. I would do this in my underwear, except I'm not going to get in my underwear on YouTube. I think that's one boundary that I'm going to keep, but I can show you how to do it. Your waist is the narrowest point at the bottom of your torso. Make sure you're not getting any of your ribs, and make sure you're not starting to come out towards your hips. So it's the narrowest point. Now, if you're not sure if you found the narrowest point of your waist, try to move it up and down and just shake it around, and maybe even do just a little move, and then it will naturally fall into the, narrowest part of your waist. Now we have to be really careful. I often take my measurements in inches, just because that's what I've had in my head since school, that I was that inch waist for my school uniform. So we have to be careful that we're not pulling it in. You don't want to see any sort of digging in. It shouldn't feel uncomfortable. You should be able to have it sort of not loose, but just comfortably sitting on there, not sagging down, and definitely not pulling in and cutting in, because you can end up with the wrong size. And then your hips are the widest point, and it's just exactly the same really. I sometimes will pop the tape measure around my hips and I just move it around, and if I'm finding it's getting caught on something, then I'm not at the widest point yet, so I move it around. And again, if it moves up and it's too easy, I'm just moving around. It's so much easier to have somebody else help you measure as well, but if not, I will do it in front of the mirror or on my phone, and I just like to make sure that it's even all the way around. You can also find guides online, but that's what I do, and I find that moving around in it helps as well, especially for the waist, to help it fall. So I've worked with inches there, but you can just as well do this in centimetres. So my waist measurements that I took when I did the blue skirt were 28 inches or 71 centimetres, and my hips were 37.5 and 95 centimetres. It doesn't matter whether you use inches or centimetres, just pick one and maybe stick consistently to it throughout the making of your skirt. To decide on the sizes of your rectangles, we're going to use your waist and your hip measurement. I'm going to start with width and then we'll do length after. So for the width of the top tier, which is narrower than the hips, we're going to use the waist. Now I know the top tier is likely to go over your hips as well, but the ease of this pattern is so much that it's definitely going to go over your hips as well. So for the top one, let's say I'm just going to use centimetres, because that seems to be what I've done with my maths here, so I'm not following my own rules, sticking to one, but I'm going to use centimetres. So my waist was 71 centimetres. Now the proportions for the amount of extra material compared to the circumference around your waist for this top tier on my blue skirt, I have done 2.1 times the circumference for the whole circumference of the top tier. I'm going to do slightly less on the brown because I think it's got quite a lot of volume, which is lovely for winter, but it's nice to have two slightly different versions. And I want to experiment with slightly less volume. So for the brown one, I am going to do about 1.9. So that's 71 times 1.9. That comes to 134.9 centimetres. So that's the whole circumference that I want. But I've got two pieces. So I've got the front top piece and I've got the back top piece. So what I want to do is to cut that in half. So I'm rounding that up to 135. And I need to divide it by 2. That comes to 67.5. So that's the whole circumference around. However, I need to remember that I have to add seam allowance. The seam allowance for this skirt is going to be 1 centimetre everywhere, or 3/8 of an inch, which are pretty much the same. So I've got 67.5, but I need to add on seam allowance for each edge on the front and on the back. So that's 2 centimetres on each piece, 69.5. So I know that my top pieces both need to be 69.5 centimetres wide. So instead of the 71 at the beginning of this sum, you'll add your own waist measurement. So yours might not be exactly the same as mine, it might be anything. But you base it off your waist measurement and then times it by, if you like the look of this one, times it by 2.1, or if you like the look of the brown one, times it by 1.9. I would recommend staying close to about 2 times if you want that sort of really gathered look. You can experiment and you can have a go at making it, whatever percentage, but that's what I like. I think anything close to 1 is going to be way too tight and it's going to be not going over your hips. I think I wouldn't go below 1.5 for the same reason, but have a play around, see what works for you. You might have a slightly different ratio between your waist and your hips as well, which makes that easier. But to stay, on the safe side, I would stick around the 2 mark. So that's my top piece. The bottom piece, I'm going to do it in exactly the same way, except I'm going to use my hip measurement. So my hip measurement is 95 centimetres. Now for the amount of gathers on the bottom, I tend to do about 2.5 times. This one was 2.7 because I wanted a lot more volume, but again for the brown I'm going to stick to slightly less. So I'm going to do 2.5 times. My hip measurement is 95, so I'm going to times that by 2.5. That comes to 237.5 centimetres, but that's the whole circumference again. So what I'm going to do, exactly the same, divide that by 2 equals, well, I'll round it up, but it pretty much equals 119 centimetres. So remember, I need to add the seam allowance, so that's plus 2 equals 121 centimetres. So each of my bottom pieces is 121 centimetres wide. Those are the widths, and we're going to do the length of them next. Now for the length, I know that my skirt is going to start at my natural waistband, at my natural waistline rather, because it's an elasticated skirt and it's fitted, so it's going to, from the elastic, so it's going to find my natural waist. So when I decide on the length of my skirt, what I'm going to do is stand in front of a mirror and I am going to measure, let the tape measure drop down, even better if you've got a meter rule or something stable or a person to help, but you can just drop it down from your natural waist down to the level that you would like it to be. So there's the start of my tape measure. I will just drop it down like this. It's going to be approximate because there will be a bit of a wave in there. You could try and add a weight to the bottom or get someone to help you. But what I would say is if you're slightly in doubt, make it slightly bigger, not slightly smaller, because you can always remove it, you can always hem it. But it's more difficult to add it on, unless you want to add another tier at the bottom. But yeah, so just lower it down like this, sort of holding it at your waist, lowering it down until the bottom is at the length that you would like. So that's the total length, and now we need to think about adding seam allowance in again. So we've got the waistband, we know that's going to be 5 centimetres. So say I wanted my skirt overall to be 88 centimetres. Now I'm 5'8", so maybe you'll be more than that or less than that, or it's personal preference. But I want my overall skirt to be, from my waist, to be 88 centimetres down to the bottom. Now I know my waistband is going to take up 5 centimetres of that, so I'm going to take 5 centimetres off. So that means we're at 83 centimetres now that I need to make up from my tiers. So what I need to do now is decide the proportions that I want my top tier and my bottom tier to make up. So with this blue skirt, I did 40% of the length for the top one and 60% of the total length for the bottom one. So the top one is just slightly less than the bottom, but they don't look super different. I wanted to make something slightly different for the brown fabric, so I'm going to play around with those percentages. So I am probably going to do between 25 and 30% for the top, and then depending on that, I'm still thinking about it. And then the rest of the percent will be, say, 75%, or 70% will be the bottom tier. So let's, for the sake of this maths, let's say it's going to be 30%. So I've got 83, and what I'm going to do is put 83, because I'm working in centimetres still, but you can do this in inches, 83 times, and then I'm going to do 0.3, and that equals 24.9 centimetres. So let's call that 25 centimetres. So that is 30% of the total length, 25 centimetres. So that's my top tier, and now I need to add seam allowance. So what I'm going to do is add 1 centimetre for the seam allowance where it joins the waistband, and 1 centimetre for the seam allowance where it joins the bottom skirt. So that's add 2 equals 27. The other thing I would say about deciding on the length of your top tier is thinking about the pocket. Now I'll just get you a inseam pocket that I've got nearby. Actually, I've got one cut out for something else. So here's an inseam pocket. It gets stitched into the side of the top tier. So you need to make sure that your top tier, and it gets placed 5 centimetres below the top of the top tier, you need to make sure that your top tier is not smaller than the join of this where it gets attached. Now this is only 18 centimeters, so 18 centimeters, add 5 because it doesn't start until 5 centimeters down, is 23. So I need to make sure that my top tier is not smaller than 23 centimeters. If it is, I'm going to need to either raise my pocket up or make the opening smaller. But I think this is a good size opening for you to be able to put your hand in. So I would just say, don't make it smaller than 23 centimeters. So that's the top one. The bottom one, I need to figure out 70% of my overall length. So again, 83 times by 0.7 equals 58.1. I need a hem, so I need to add on some centimeters now. When I make a hem, I like to fold it over by about 1 centimeter and then again by about 2 centimeters. So that means I need to add on 3 centimeters. That's 61.1. And now I need to add a 1 centimeter seam allowance for where it joins to the top tier. So that, I don't know why I'm using a calculator for adding 1, is 62.1. So I'm just going to call that 62. The other thing to think about with the length of your bottom skirt is whether or not you want to add an extra detail like pin tucks. So I didn't do it on my blue one, but I am going to do it on my brown one. And all you need to do is decide the depth that you'd like your pin tuck to be. Mine are going to be, I'm going to do 2 lots of 1 centimeter pin tucks. I'll put a picture up of pin tucks here as well so that it makes sense to you what they are in case you're not sure. And then you need to allow twice the amount per pin tuck. So if I want 1 centimeter deep pin tuck, I need to allow 2 extra centimeters. So if I'm doing 2, I need to allow 4 centimeter extra. So I'm going to add that on to the length I need for my bottom skirt for this one because I'm planning to do them. So the waistband is going to be exactly the same width as your top piece because the top piece is not being gathered. It's going to have a waistband stitch to the top of it, and then the elastic band is going to be fed in through a channel of the waistband, and that causes the gathers. So they have to be exactly the same width. So the height of your waistband depends on the elastic you have. I've used a 5 centimeter wide elastic in this one. So what I've done is times, because the waistband folds over the top of the elastic and you need seam allowance, I've times that by 2, so 10 centimeters, and I've added my 2 centimeters seam allowance. So my waistband piece is exactly the same width as my top tier, and or length rather, as my top tier, and then it is 12 centimeters wide. I hope that makes sense. I've got a little illustration as well. So some people are more visual than auditory learners, so hopefully one of those things will make sense to you. Again, if you're struggling to remember all of this, or you want to see it written down, remember on my website, when you, if you go into the products, there's a free product, donations appreciated, with a inseam pattern piece and also the written instructions for how to make this skirt. So you can have those as a written guide and use this video as a supplement for some visual aid. So those are my pieces. So now I've got all the pieces in my written out. I know exactly what I need. I need to cut out 4 inseam pocket pieces. Again, that's on my website. You can download that. The link is below. So now it's cutting out time. So what I would always do is give your fabric a good old press. Get rid of any creases because you want it to be lying nice and flat when you cut it out. This skirt was quite easy to cut out because it's got a check and it's very helpful for following things like that. But when you're drawing big things like rectangles on plain linen, it can be slightly trickier. So make sure you've pressed it and it really is nice and flat. The other thing you can do is orientate yourself with your fabric. You may know this already, so if you do, you can skip on to the next chapter. So fabric has something called a selvage edge, which is the edge of the fabric as it's made in the loom. It's got one on either end. I can't show you, well, there they are both at the same time, but it's very wide fabric. And then the grain line, or the direction of the fabric, runs down straight parallel to that selvage. That's all we're going to worry about today. We're not worried about, so I'm going to think about today because this is a simple pattern. So it's best if your pattern pieces run in the direction of the grain line. It falls better and it's good practice. So give it all a good press, and what we're going to do is we are going to, depending on the width of your fabric, but hopefully it's wide enough for your pieces. If not, I'm sure you can piece it together or colour block it. But what I'm going to do, because I find it helpful when cutting big pieces of fabric, because this is 150 centimetres wide, nearly I think, is fold it in half. So I'm going to give it a press, fold it in half, and then I'm going to draw out the pieces with a ruler and with some chalk. And I'm just going to draw them out exactly as I've done on this template here. It's important to square the top of the fabric up as well. You can see where I've washed it and where it's been cut, that it wasn't even. So I've been using my meter rule to do the bigger lines, but I used my quilting ruler as a sort of set square to allow me to get a right angle, because it's got, as you can see, it's got the right angle see-through bit through there. So if I just take this pin out, I've been lining it up with the selvage and making sure it lines up with that white line, and then I know I've got a right angle, and I start by doing that. This is how I do the zero waist gather dresses as well, just making sure I start with a nice right angled edge and work from there. I've been drawing my pieces out with chalk. There's the selvage edge down here. I've got my, this is on the fold, I've got my top piece and bottom piece on the other side of the fold, my bottom piece top and my bottom piece back here, and I've got pockets and waistbands in the gaps. So I'm going to pin it down, and then I'm going to, so it doesn't slip around, and then I'm going to cut it out. I'm cutting out on the floor. I don't have anywhere big enough really to cut out dress skirt patterns, anything bigger than a small bag, to be honest. So cutting out on the floor, that's fine. This little sewing gremlin, that's what my partner calls me. Also add a little notch 5 centimetres down from the top on both of the short ends of your top piece, and this will be the mark where the little marker to show you where to attach your pocket. So that's all my pattern pieces cut out, which is very exciting. I like to mark them with a bit of chalk as well, just to say this is the top tier, this is the bottom tier. It doesn't matter which is front and back at the moment, unless you're thinking about pattern placement. That's up to you. So up next, we're on to sewing. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is how I start all projects like this with the skirt or elasticated waist trousers, is to get the inseam pocket pieces attached to the top tier front and top tier back. So there are 4 inseam pocket pieces. 2 of them are going to be attached to the front top tier and 2 will be attached to the back. We're going to attach them right sides together. So fabric has a right side and a wrong side. This is not a particularly useful example in that sense because it looks the same on both sides. But if you've got like a cotton with a pattern printed on it, and there's an outside, the side that the world will see, the nice side, that's called the right side, in case you're not familiar. And then the other side, the inside bit, is called the wrong side. So it's important because we don't want our seam allowance showing on the right side. So inseam pockets are going to be attached right sides to the right side of the top tier of the skirt. So this is my top piece. I've got my pocket right sides together with the top piece. I position the top of it at the notch that I cut, 5 centimetres down, and I'm going to sew these together, and I'm going to sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, or 0.6 centimetres, which is less than the rest of our seam allowance, because then it means that the pocket rolls in slightly and it looks super neat. So I'm going to do that on all 4 of them. It's totally fine to finish edges with a zigzag if you don't have an overlocker or a serger, or if you're not sure what that is. Here's mine over here. It was relatively inexpensive, but my partner bought it for me as a 30th birthday present a few years ago. Yeah, very grateful, and I love finishing seams with it. But for years I sewed clothes finishing seams with a zigzag stitch, so you absolutely can do that. But having a serger just means it trims off any loose edges and it fixes it really nicely. I don't really have matching thread to go with this today, but I'm not super fussed because it's on the inside and it's still natural nice tones. But if you're using a zigzag, the type of zigzag I would use to finish a seam would be one where the sort of zigzags are quite wide, maybe sort of on a 4 or 5 mil setting, and then I would make sure they were quite close together so that the stitch length was shorter. You basically want as little opportunity as possible for it to fray into your seam. It can also help if you trim your edges if you're zigzagging first, so that you've got a nice neat edge to zigzag over. Try not to zigzag too much over the edge because it can not be so great for your machine. That's totally fine with the serger, it's meant to do that. There's a brief history of seam finishing. But I'm going to be overlocking today. So if you see me doing that and you don't have an overlocker, don't worry, it's fine. You can use your sewing machine on the zigzag setting. A few things that I do when I make inseam pockets, and I think it makes them look really neat, lie flat, and I've made so many now that, yeah, I've got my technique down and I want to share it with you. So what I do is when I've attached it right sides to the top tier, like I've just shown you, what I do next is I finish the edges of the bit where it is attached to the skirt. I then give it a press, so I press all of the seam allowance towards the pocket. So the seam allowance of the top tier of the skirt and the pocket seam allowance all gets pressed towards that pocket. And then I'm going to edge stitch, and edge stitching is where you stitch, sorry Phil, the doggy's barking outside. When you edge stitch, you're stitching about 1 millimetre or 2 away from the folded line. And I'm going to stitch through all the layers of the pocket to attach it to the seam allowance. That means that that pocket sits really nice and flat and it just looks super neat. I really like it. So I'm going to do that on all 4 pockets. So when you've done that, it's time to attach your 2 top tiers together, your front and back, and you're going to lay them out right sides together so they are completely mirror image. And then you're going to pin around all the way down around the pocket and down again, making sure you leave that pocket opening free. And remember, we're doing all of this with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So you can see with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, I've come down here 1 centimetre past the top of that pocket so that I can then take a corner and go down here with a 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way around the pocket, back up here and then down here, leaving this open. This was my stitching line from attaching the pocket itself. If I open this up, and you can see the pretty edge stitching as well. And because I did a different seam allowance to join the pocket compared to the side seams, it rolled in slightly, which is great. So it's going to be super neat. Now you need to finish the edges of your pocket and your skirt. So it can be a little bit tricky going around the edges with an overlocker, around the tight corners and things like that, but I'll show you how I do it on mine, and hopefully that will help. Overlock the pocket because this angle's a bit tricky. I started at this point because it's easier to lower your needles down into a tricky point. What you can do when you get to the other end is either try and tail off around this corner if you feel comfortable, or if not, tail off at a straight point and then pick back up at this tricky point and then tail back off again over in the opposite direction. Yeah, just if you really want to get neat corners. So that's my top tier attached, the front and the back, and the seams finished, which is great. The other thing you can do, I do this more with trousers than the skirt, but you can make sure your pockets are pressed to the front, because remember the hands go in the pockets at the front, not at the back. You can press the pockets towards the front and you can sew a little bar tack at the top just to reinforce it. I've done it on the brown skirt, I haven't on the blue. I don't tend to do it on skirts so much because I find that they have less tension on them, but I definitely do it on elasticated waist trouser inseam pockets, especially because, or if I'm putting things like my phone or something heavier in, I don't want that that pocket joint to wear. So to do a bar tack, I set my machine on a particular setting, so I'll show you that now. So that's the top tier done. I'm now going to move on to the bottom tier, which is super easy because there's no pockets. All I'm going to do is lay the bottom tier front and back right sides together and sew down the short edge. And then I'm just going to overlock and finish the seam down the short edge. And now I've got a nice tube. So that's that done. And now I need to attach the top tier to the bottom tier. They're different widths because remember the top tier was 1.9 times my waist and then the bottom tier was 2.5 times my hip. What I need to do to get them to meet and to create this look is sew some gather stitches. So if you've sewn gather stitches before and you kind of know what they are and you're happy without a refresher, then skip ahead. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through some refresher tips and things I find useful. So gathering is when you sew two sort of basting lines, and that means really long stitch length, maybe like 5mm stitch length, not finishing on start and end, around the top of your bottom tier of your skirt, all the way along the one side of the top, finishing just a couple of mil before the side seams, and then you sew another row underneath it. Both of those should be less than 1 centimetre away from the top raw edge of the skirt, because the seam allowance is going to be 1 centimetre and you don't want those stitches showing. If they do, it's not the end of the world at all. They're so long, they're really easy to unpick. It saves a bit of faff. A couple of things to bear in mind when you are doing gathering stitches. I use a different colour bobbin thread when I'm doing gathering stitches because it gathers, and when I say gather, it's when you pull your threads to create like a runched up fabric. The bobbin thread pulls much more easily than the top thread. So yeah, I use a different colour bobbin thread so I can see which one's the bobbin thread and I know which one to pull. The other thing is to make sure your top row and your row underneath of gather stitches don't cross over because they can pierce the thread and they can stop it pulling. The other one was to not do the start and stop, the back stitch bit. So those are my top tips on sewing gathering stitches. And on one side of each, I'm going to tie little knots. That's just to stop it pulling through. So I'm going to very gently ease out these gathers by pulling the bobbin thread. I'm going to pull both the bobbin threads at the same time for the front of the bottom and then also at the back of the bottom. And I'm just going to gently ease these gathers through and I'm going to narrow the width, the circumference of this skirt until it fits the circumference of the bottom of my top tier. And when I'm pretty happy they're the same width, what I'm going to do next is right sides together, put the top tier over the top of the bottom. Now, this can be easy to get round the wrong way. So what I'm going to do is turn my top tier inside out so you can see the wrong side of it, and the bottom stays right side out. So that means that they are touching with their right sides. I'm going to layer it over the top and making sure that the gathered ruffled edge of the bottom tier is going to meet the raw edge of the bottom of the top tier. I'm going to start off by pinning the side seams so that they match, and then I'm going to ease the gathers out and make sure they're spread around evenly because that'll make the skirt look lovely. And when I'm happy with that, I'm going to pin it all in place and then I'm going to sew around slowly with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, making sure that neither layer is slipping over the other and that those raw edges are still meeting and the gathers aren't getting sort of bunched and pulled in funny directions. So taking it slow, stopping and putting your needle down, lifting your foot and making sure that everything's okay and you're not sewing through layers you shouldn't be. Take it really easy. Before you finish this seam, make sure you turn it back to right sides out and it all makes sense. You've sewn the right sides together, that you've sewn the top tier in the right orientation with the pockets at the top. Yeah, just make sure you're really happy with it because it is so difficult to unpick overlock stitches. When you're definitely happy with it, then you can finish that seam. So now you've got your top skirt attached to your bottom skirt, which is very exciting. So all that's left now is the waistband. We're going to join the front waistband and the back waistband together with a 1 centimetre seam allowance down the short ends, creating a tube, right sides together. I'm going to press those seams open and then on one long edge, I am going to fold it in wrong sides together, by 1 centimetre all the way around like this. And now on the unfolded side, I'm going to pin it, matching up the side seams, right sides together with the top of my skirt. So just really making sure those side seams are lining up and that it should be exactly the same width, so it should be fine to pin it all the way around. So then I'm going to sew that with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. No need to finish that seam because it will be hidden inside the waistband. So the next bit is folding the waistband over so that the folded edge is on the inside of your skirt and it covers up the stitching line that you just did. Something that's going to make this easier is pressing up the seam allowance from attaching the waistband so it all faces upwards, because you want the waistband to completely enclose all of these seams and everything like that. So what I tend to do is very carefully go around and fold it over so I can, from the inside, so I can see that the folded over edge is going to cover my stitching line. And I'm pinning it around and I make sure it covers it and goes over it by about 1 to 2 millimeters. It's important to do that because otherwise when we do the next step, your waistband won't be stitched down properly. If you want to, you can baste this just to make sure you're happy with its placement. I tend to rely on feel quite a lot, but I'll show you what I mean. We're going to be stitching in the ditch, so that is basically hiding your stitches into the seam allowance that you just did. So you can see why it's important for the folded over edge on the inside to be slightly further than that, because you need to catch it when you stitch in that ditch. My main tip with this is to pin it a lot and take it really slow and keep checking you've still got it. And if it's starting to slip away, just roll it under a little bit more. I'm going to start from this one side seam and we're going to finish about 2 inches before the bit that we started, leaving a gap. You need that gap because you need somewhere to insert the elastic. So once you've done that, we're getting really close to finishing. I'm going to get our piece of elastic, and something that I find really helpful for putting the elastic through is to use a nice big old safety pin. So I use one of my quilting safety pins. It can be any safety pin, but it's quite big because it really helps to be able to feel it. So you attach this to the elastic and you feed it through the channel, and then you can kind of, like I'm doing here, sort of pull it through and use that pin as a way to sort of hold it as you pull the fabric back over it. And I'm going to do that, making sure it doesn't pull through the other end until I see it come through. And then I am just going to attach the elastic together, and before I close it up, I'm just going to try it on and make sure I'm happy with the fit. I've made a lot of elasticated waist things, I know which size, but it's always good to double check. Now, what I'd like to do is stretch out the waistband so that the gathers are sort of evenly spread, and then I like to secure the waistband in to stop it moving around and the gathers moving too much. What I do to do that is to stitch through the waistband, so through the layers of fabric and the elastic in the ditch of that side seam, and just sort of stretch the fabric out the way and stitch down. I do that on both sides. I often also do one sort of in the middle at the back and one in the middle at the front. They often get hidden anyway by all of the gathers, and I just think it keeps those gathers looking nice and even, and it helps the waistband lie nice and flat. So before we hem the skirt, I'm going to show you how to do some pin tucks, because I think there'll be a really cute little extra detail on the skirt. You can also do this earlier on before you attach the 2 skirts together, but I thought it'd be nice to show you as a little finishing detail. But if you do it earlier, you've got less fabric in the way. So pin tucks are really lovely little folded horizontal sort of folds of fabric. Beautiful, like a little historical detail that I'm seeing coming up quite a lot in styles at the moment.
So I'm showing you how to do pin tucks on this little bit of sample because it's much easier than getting the whole big skirt out. But essentially what you want to do is decide how deep you want your pin tucks to be, which you should have done already when you cut the size of your skirt, but it's double whatever you want your size to be. So I wanted 1 centimetre pin tuck, so I've added 2 centimetres per pin tuck. And that's because this centre line will end up as the fold. So what you're going to do is fold it so that that centre line is in the middle there, and you give it a press, and you're going to stitch the first one down this line here. So it'll go through onto that one. So I've stitched it along this line and I've pressed it down because it's going to be pointing down. So if I just turn that around, to do the next one, I need to fold back another piece of fabric, or another fold rather, and I'm going to use my ruler, or if you've got a seam gauge, that would be useful, to make sure that that's 1 centimetre the whole way along. So I just need to move that down a bit. And I'm going to go along the whole way, making sure that's 1 centimetre. And then I'm going to give it a press, and I'm going to stitch just underneath here. So it's about just slightly bigger than 1 centimetre basically. And the stitching line should be hidden by this fold. Here you go, so I've done that stitching line. So now I'm going to open it back out again. And I've got my 2 pin tucks, so I just need to give them a press. But that's what you do. And if I were you, I would do this once your skirt is already a circle. Otherwise, you're going to have to try and join these pin tucks up on the side seam. So I would wait until your bottom skirt is a full circle before you're hemming basically, and then sew these on. I started my first pin tuck 42 centimetres from the top of my bottom skirt, but try your skirt on and see what works for you in terms of the length. The important thing is that you've already added the amount of extra length you needed for the amount of pin tucks you wanted. But you just keep on going like this really. You could even do a bigger one here or something. That could be really cute.
So we're so nearly there. The last thing is just to hem your skirt. So what you do is, or what I like to do, but you can do a deeper hem if you like, is, well, try it on, make sure you're happy with the length. I'm happy with this length. What I'm going to do is fold it over by 1 centimetre and press it down. And I'm going to fold it over again by 2 centimetres, press that down. You can also do 1.5 and 1.5, whatever works for you. And then I'm going to stitch my hem down with a straight stitch, obviously finishing at the start and end with a back stitch to secure it. Then I'm going to give my skirt a really good press and I'm going to put it on. So here's my finished skirt. Here it is, there's the pin tucks. I'm so happy with it. I love this colour. It's super autumnal, as is the dark blue check one. And I'm really happy. I think I'll end up using this as a block to make lots of skirts, and I hope that you do the same. I'm excited to make some lighter weight ones, almost like a petticoat, and some lightweight cotton, I think, to go under these as well, double layer up, and that also would work well as a summer skirt. So I think it's really versatile and I'm very excited. So yeah, I'd love it if you gave it a go. Please share your version with me on Instagram if you decide to give it a go. I'd really love to see them. You can put the hashtag Bramble Skirt and then tag me at Thread and Yarn, and then I'll be able to see it, which yeah, I would love. Remember to save this video so you can come back to it, and to download the written instructions and the inseam pocket piece on my website. Should be here, and I'll put it below, but it's threadandyarn.co.uk. Yeah, I think you've got everything you need. I hope you have fun and decide to make your own bramble skirt. I'd love to see it if you did different versions as well, with more pin tucks or anything else, more tiers, all of that sort of thing. But I hope you like it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this wasn't too long or confusing. If you are confused, have a look at the written instructions, and if they don't make sense, then drop me a note. I'm happy to help. On my website, you can also find the pattern, paper or digital, for my Bilbo vest, which is my first sewing pattern and I think a really useful piece year round. I'm actually planning on wearing it with these skirts in my little photo shoot tomorrow, so you'll probably see those, see it included in the photos in a minute. It's reversible, so you've got the patchwork side, or a plain side if you would like, and I've tried to make it size inclusive, and it goes from a UK 6 to a UK 30, I'm pretty sure, or 32. I'll put it up here. But yeah, if this works, hopefully I'll do I'll do some more of these little tutorials. As I said, any support really appreciated. To help me live my life of a creative, that would be wonderful, and to keep me being able to spend time on things like this. No pressure though. Thanks for watching.